What's up, guys? So due to high demand, a lot of people are asking how I've cut these fenders right here. Let me show you right here. What I've actually planned on doing is taking these out. These Sahara fender flares, these are the stock Sahara fender flares right here that have just been cut. So I'm still utilizing the front inner fender, but I am getting rid of these because the rear one was cut too much. I thought I was gonna like it. It was kind of cool, but I think I'll like the more of a thicker flare to kind of match the front a little bit more. So yeah, guys, I think the gloss black on this was just kind of blending in too much. So pretty much everything was just looking too dark. I want to have a little bit of contrast, a little bit of offset. So the matte black stock fenders will look good in my opinion. So these are coming off, and I'm still going to be keeping this same inner fender, and I'll show you guys how I do cut that and mount that up. So I've already got the rear ones off right here, and next I'm just gonna pop this one off and I'll show you how I do that, and then I'll go get my stock fenders and show you how I cut those. All right, so the process is gonna be exactly the same as with this one as the stock one, except I've already got a lot of stuff removed already versus the stock one. So here we have the stock one. You want to unplug this side marker lamp right there, and then you have 6 10mm bolts. So you've got, you know, like one right there on the metal support bracket and then the rest on the inner fender. Very simple, very self-explanatory. All right, just to show you guys the bolts that you will need to be taken out, the 10mm ones are right here, right there, underneath, right there, and right there. And one more on the support bracket right here. And if you guys were wondering, the electrical for the side marker is right there. It's just this little button. You press down on that and you just pull it out, and it should come out pretty easily. So once you get your electrical unplugged and you get this the 10mm out, you can go ahead and rip the fender off basically. So I'll show you how to do that on this one. All right, so there are gonna be a ton of these plastic clips right here, these body clips. They're kind of like Christmas trees, but they have 2 clips right here. So basically when you rip the fender out, there will probably be a good bit of these left in the fender as well. So to get these out, I'll show you how to do that in a minute, but you basically get some thin needle nose and squeeze these together. You kind of get underneath it and then squeeze these 2 pins together, and then it'll pop out like that. So what I'm going to be using is some really thin needle nose, and I do try to be careful not to let this scratch the paint as I'm digging under the clip. So as you guys saw, that was pretty easy to actually peel off. I like to kind of grab the edge and kind of bend it back as I pull out on it, and then just kind of give it a brute force up. So that way it'll rip the rest of the way off. As you guys see, there are no clips left in these holes right here. So I'm gonna have to go back with these pliers, and I'm gonna have to unclip all of these individually. So a tip I want to give you guys is the tool that you will be using to cut it, and I suggest using a Dremel because I've always used the Dremels. I've probably cut about, let's see, about 4 pairs of stock fenders now, at least, maybe 5. The Dremel is the best tool to cut it because it's very controlled. It's smaller, so like if you were to use like a saw or a Sawzall would just get in here and shake way too much, and it would not, because you know it's plastic and it's flimsy. So I mean, this is way more controlled and easier, a lot smoother. So yeah, I really recommend investing in a Dremel. So I mean, this is not the only use. Dremels have always come in handy just for like small projects. So when I installed the roll cage, I had to grind down some casting on the body to make it fit, stuff like that. So once you guys get to this point to where you have the whole fender and the inner fender out as one piece, you guys know that I still have the stock inner fenders. The reason why I do have stock inner fenders is because I think they look good. You know, they blend in, they don't pop out or anything crazy, and they function really well. So I mean, you know, the function there, the looks, they blend in, it's nothing too crazy. So, and yeah, so I mean, I'm not gonna change those out until I do get the ones that I really do want. I will eventually get are pretty pricey. Those are the Poison Spider ones. That won't be happening for a while, so that's more of just cosmetics. So here I have a silver sharpie to show you guys what I'm talking about. So if you kind of just put it on the fender on this line, flush, and then go down, that will make a nice and straight line. So you will do that all the way down, and it kind of like goes up right here. So it's kind of self-explanatory where the line is. Continue that up on this inner support, and then just all the way across until you get to right there. So since this material is a little bit thicker, you can use a Sawzall on that. I have done that before. So once you cut your inner fender out as one piece with this and this, these have little plastic clips right here, little Christmas tree clips holding that together. So now the inner fender will separate from the actual fender itself. So yeah, now you guys know what to do if you're keeping the stock inner fenders like I am, or if you're getting aftermarket ones. So I'm going to show you what I'm going to do on mine. So that's going to be separating the inner fender from the fender without cutting the inner fender. So I'm just going to be taking this. That's the only piece I will be needing. So I will clip that in without the inner fender so I can cut it and then disregard the excess. All right guys, so since I'm not going to be messing with this inner fender, I'm going to go ahead and just zip off all these little plastic stubs right here. So we've got just a few of them just along the fender. So I'm going to just snip those off, and that way I'll be able to pull the fender out from the inner liner. Also guys, make sure that you're wearing safety glasses or goggles or anything like that, and be cautious of, you know, if the blade does break. I've had a couple of them break on me already just because I didn't get the most expensive ones because I ran out of those. But be cautious of anything, you know, flying at your face, because that can happen. By the way guys, the reason I am keeping stock fenders for now is I do want Poison Spider Crusher narrow fender flares. I do think those look the best, you know, front and rear, narrow width, so you know, nothing too crazy with standard width. But those do also cost an arm and a leg, so you know, I'm not too worried about cosmetics as much right now, so I think these will suffice. But yeah, just trying to focus on my priorities right now. Whether that be, you know, getting a lift kit, you know, bigger tires, wheels, beefing up your axles, etc. All right, so you guys just saw how that popped out of there. So yeah, only thing holding this actual fender flare in the inner fender are those plastic little clips that you have to grind smooth so that can separate out. So the whole inner fender then yanks out just like that. So if you guys wanted to separate the actual fender from the inner fender to cut the inner fender, that is also an option. But I do suggest making the line before you do separate these two, because this helps make the line. Here's also another inner fender just to give you guys a preference. This is without the inner support, that thick inner support I explained earlier. This is just the thin plastic inner support. So yeah guys, you will have a pretty hard time if you try just to mount this without that thick inner support right there. So like I said, once you cut along this line with the inner fender, as long as you have this thicker inner support in there with the thin inner support, you will be able to mount this like with the stock bolts. Because with the main inner liner, these holes right here are just way too big for the bolts to go in, so you would have a really hard time trying to mount just this. So once you guys get to this point right here, you can go ahead and have your cut inner fender, and you can install that with the factory hardware. That way you can just take the fender flare and it's ready to be cut. So these inner clips right here do slide in like this. There's an open slot, so they just slide in like that. You kind of wiggle on, pull this up, pull that edge up, and they're set. All right guys, so now that we've got the actual fender itself, all the clips in, ready to be slapped on the Jeep, and then we'll start taping it off and getting ready to cut it. Now it comes time to measure and tape it off and all that. So basically you're gonna want to figure out what design you want. There's a million different ways you could do this. A lot of people just cut on the edge right here and then just go straight across, and then you get rid of that front and then all of this lip. I've had that on a Jeep before. I really like the narrow look a lot more, so I'm probably gonna be getting rid of all this. So as you guys have seen, I have a silver Sharpie right here, and I've just kind of freehanded and mocked up kind of what I want to do. I kind of want to differentiate a little bit from what I did last time, because that's what I normally do. So as you guys can see right here, I put the tape measure on the body, and before I made a mark right there, and that's where I normally do it. That's about 3 inches. So I made a mark at 4 inches. I'm gonna try it a little bit further out this time to try to give me a little bit more flare, because I do feel like before the flare was just kind of wasn't hardly there. It looked good. So, you know, if I do it like this, I will still be able to have enough to where I can cut it and make it narrow like I had it before. So another way people actually cut these is they include this little corner right here, which is, you know, it comes out where the grill is, about right here, and also right there, and that just, it looks like fangs sticking out. I don't really think that looks that great from the side, because you just have like a little fang sticking out, and it makes your wheelbase look kind of messed up, like your tires are sunk back in. So I do like to cut the fender off at where the grill stops right here, so that way it's flush, kind of like most aftermarket fenders like the Poison Spider, etc. So yeah guys, once you decide on a design, I'm gonna get my masking tape, and then I'll measure out exactly where it needs to go. And I've also got the line parallel with the body, so you guys can see on the factory flare how it just goes straight out versus parallel with the body like this. So this is how I'm doing it that way, versus going straight out and looking kind of like a mud flap. I'm gonna be going parallel with the body, so that way it'll look more of like a fender flare, and they'll look more custom. So like an aftermarket fender flare, I do get a lot of questions about how I do cut these fender flares, and a lot of people think that they are aftermarket, especially the Sahara ones. Yeah guys, once I get all that figured out, I'm going to, at this bend right here, I'm going to get the masking tape, and I'm going to go down at an angle like this. So I'm going to kind of taper it in a little bit. I usually taper it into this line right here, this factory crease, but I'm probably going to try to go out a little bit more to give me a little bit more fender. And that way, if I don't like that, I'll still be able to cut more back, just how I traditionally do it. All right guys, so a tip on laying down the tape right here, what I did was I measured however long I wanted this to be from the body. So you guys can see right there, 4 inches. I did that in multiple spots, and then I made my marks with the Sharpie. And I also did it on this bend right here, so I'll know where I'll be able to taper off from when I go down there. Another tip is this crease right here, this factory line on this fender flare, is also parallel with the body. So you can use that as just something to look at to kind of like make sure that the tape is parallel with the body. You can also hold it up and then pull it away, or just look at this line, it also helps. But if you do measure and make your marks all the way throughout, you shouldn't have any issues with having your tape being parallel where you want it. And for the front part right here, this is just going to be mainly free-handed, because you can't really measure this area. It's just more of a pain to try to figure out. So I mean, I've done this quite a few times, so I have a pretty good idea of what I'm doing on trying to taper this in. I mean, so once you cut off the rest of this, you'll see underneath that there will be the lip that attaches to the clips on the fender panel right here. So I kind of want to just go into that little strip of plastic that I will be keeping, and I'll show you guys that over here. So as you guys can see, this little strip of plastic is still from the fender, and that was cut along the ridge right there. So that was just pretty much right before it started to peek out and started to cave in. So for this rear tape line right here, where I made my Sharpie mark on this bend on the factory fender, I've got my tape. I just put it on that same line, and then I kind of brought it in closer to about 1.25 inches from this factory bend. Not the body, but this factory line right here. So that's about 1.25 inches over. So once I get my straight cut, I'm gonna taper this in just a little bit right here. Just wanted to show you guys before I start the time lapse of me cutting the fender on what I did right here. So how I'm gonna taper that in. I pretty much just kind of free-handed it into this factory line, this crease right here. So I'm pretty much just gonna go into that. It's just gonna feather in nicely. Okay guys, so the trick is when you're using a Dremel is so that the same way that the blade spins is the way you want to cut. So you're not working against the blade, if that makes sense. So that way it's not overheating the motor and it burns up. I've done that on a couple of Dremels before, so learn from my mistakes. And also let the Dremel do all the cutting. So don't try to go too fast. Take your time and everything should come out the way you want it to. So there's the cut fender right there. I was not able to finish trimming on the very back part just because I didn't want to hit the paint on the grill or the fender panel or anything like that. So I'm just gonna pop the fender back off so I can finish trimming that. That way I don't risk hitting the paint or anything. All right, so you guys probably want a better idea on how to cut that because it is kind of tricky if you don't do it right. So now that I've got the fender popped off, you can see where my silver line is right there. So I'm basically just gonna follow that onto that crease mark. So here's the finished product right here. The edges do need to be cleaned up. I will scrape off these little melted pieces once I'm done, but you guys can get an idea of how this came out. You guys can see how I followed that line and then just up to where my line was. It kind of just free-handed that. So I'll have to match that on the other side. So that way I'm still able to hold in a clip right here. So when you guys get the fender in before you cut it, I would suggest putting in a few clips so that way you can take them back out once you cut this, depending on how close you cut this. You may not have to take the fender back off to finish cutting this. I just did that so I didn't have to worry about hitting the paint right there. But just having the fender up there just to cut it and then pulling it back off to finish up, little pieces up here and trimming it up and all that, you can only just put in like a couple or a few clips just to hold it in place. I like to use a razor blade to peel up these little shavings as well. So there's the finished product without the weather stripping. You guys can get the weather stripping like that's on the Sahara one right here. This weather stripping, and it has adhesive inside. You can get it, I got it at O'Reilly's, but you probably can get it at like Pet Boys or any other auto parts store. All right, so there's a little side-to-side comparison. You guys can tell that the front on this one comes in a little bit cleaner than that one does. That one's just kind of open there. Just a little tip here, guys, if you're trying to mock up this side versus this side, found it helpful if you measure from the hood latch, say about right there, to the edge where it starts to bend in right there. So say about 3 inches right there on that bend. That way, you can kind of figure out where to measure to, where it starts to bend in a little bit and where to go to. Also, I found another point of measurement. I just stuck it right in between that button and then down to the crease line. So you guys can see measuring about right there from about right there. So just little ideas and measurements right there to help you guys get the same result on the next fender. So there's the first one done. You guys can get an idea of how I went in on that. Basically just follow this line straight up and then free-handed the curve on that, parallel with the body about 4 inches. Tapered it in about 1.25 inches from the crease line on the fender, and then kind of tapered that. All right, so the front's done. I think those look the best out of any ones I've cut before. Now we're gonna go and do the rear. So I'll show you guys how to do one for each, one on the front and one on the rear, and then I'll show you the final product when I'm done with all four. So here is the rear fender and the inner fender. Lots of people, pretty much everybody that I've seen really on Instagram and just, you know, around my town and just people that I've seen all around the world, they don't run a rear inner fender. Really mainly just because you don't need one, unless you're trying to protect the paint in the tub. And companies also do make rear inner fenders that look pretty good, like the Poison Spider, Crawler Concepts, etc., that have a logo that will show the body color through their logo. But I just can't justify spending that much money on those right now, and it's an inner fender. So behind this, it'll just be the bare tub. So, you know, if rocks come up and hit that, I mean, that really doesn't happen hardly at all. So I haven't had any chips on the paint on the underside of the tub. So, I mean, I've never had any issues with that. I usually keep the inner fender wells and the undercarriage and all that clean as well. So yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and separate the inner fender. That way I can clip the fender itself onto the body and then cut it that way. So a lot more simple than the front. You know, we don't have an electrical wiring harness. We don't have any bolts or anything like that. To take this out, you just have Christmas tree clips, you know, right there, and some up here. So you'll need like one of those pry tools that look like this that you can get off of Amazon. So yeah, taking this out, it's really self-explanatory. Same process as the front, you know, just pretty much ripping it off at the same way. Make sure you guys are staying cautious because I did just break another bit. So if you guys want to reuse this rear inner fender, you can do the same method on the front and get a silver Sharpie or something like that to make a line, and you can go along and cut that rear inner fender. A little bit better view on the rear inner fender, so you know, same method as the front. You get a Sharpie and just make that straight line all the way across. You can cut that. It's a little bit easier on this one just because it's a single thin layer of plastic, so that way you don't have to cut through any supports or anything funky like that. And this inner support will just go back in with those same Christmas tree clips. I don't really know what that is though, that's kind of gross. So I've got all my plastic clips set into the fender, and now I'm just gonna throw it up there. So I've already made the marks at 4 inches to match the front fender flares, but I do think that'll be too much for the rear. I've always done the rears a little bit more skinnier, so I think I'm probably gonna do about 3 inches. That'll probably look the best. But also to point out that the rear fender flares are also not as wide as the front ones, so that'll kind of make up the difference. Alright guys, check it out. So I got it all taped up. This is what I did. So I did 3 inches, like I said earlier, from the body, not this crease line, but to the body to here. So I got 3 inches, that's where I'm gonna cut. And then once I get to that bend right here, I tapered it in down to about 1 inch right here from this crease line. So not from the body, but this crease line right here, so 1 inch over. This is still about 3 inches, but it's a little bit wider right there, so it will look more like a legit fender. And that's how I did it on the back side. So all I gotta do is just taper in the edges on the front and the rear. Now it's time to clean the edges up with a razor blade. Guys, so there's the final products. They're both cut. All the edges are cleaned up, everything like that. Everything is looking nice and trimmed. All the ends are tucked away. Everything is nice and clean. Front and rear came out really good. I'll get you guys a little bit of a walk around video right here. Way it'll just rip the west, so that way it'll rip the rest of the way off. So now I'm gonna take a flathead, so you can use that as a what?